My wife kissed me goodbye at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning, told me she loved me, and drove away. I watched her leave from the upstairs window. Then I picked up my phone and called the private investigator I had already hired 3 weeks earlier. Because I already knew exactly where she was going. And it wasn't the gym. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because this story, like all stories that end in devastation, did not begin with a dramatic discovery or a suspicious phone or a late night that didn't add up. It began with a feeling. And I almost talked myself out of it entirely. My name is Marcus. And 3 years ago, I married the woman I was completely certain was my person. Her name was Diane. 34 years old. A pediatric nurse who spent her working hours caring for sick children and came home smelling of hospital soap and quiet exhaustion, and something underneath all of that, a warmth that never seemed to diminish regardless of how hard her day had been. Everyone loved Diane. Her patients' parents sent her handwritten cards. Her colleagues covered her shifts without complaint. Our neighbors stopped her on the street just to talk, just to be near her particular quality of attention, the way she made every person she spoke to feel like the most important person in the room. I loved her the way you love someone when you genuinely cannot imagine the architecture of your life without them standing at the center of it. We had been married 3 years. Together for 6. We had a dog named Scout, a mortgage we were slowly winning against, and plans, real, detailed, specific plans, for the family we were going to build together. I was, by every measure I knew how to apply, a happy man. But here is the thing about happiness built on a lie. It has a texture. A slight wrongness you can feel but not immediately name. Like a room that looks perfectly normal until you realize one wall is 3 inches shorter than it should be. You don't see it. You feel it. And once you feel it, you cannot stop feeling it. The first time I felt it was a Wednesday evening in February. Diane came home from her shift later than expected. Not dramatically late, 40 minutes, maybe. She explained it immediately, before I even asked. A patient's family had needed extra time. Paperwork had backed up. She was sorry, she was tired, dinner smelled wonderful. All perfectly reasonable. But something in the delivery was slightly off. The explanation had arrived too quickly, too completely, as though it had been prepared in advance rather than offered naturally. I had been an attorney for 9 years. I knew the difference between someone recounting what had happened and someone recounting what they had decided to say. I said nothing. But I noticed. Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus kept a mental record of moments that individually meant nothing but collectively were building a picture he wasn't yet ready to look at directly. Then came the Saturday that changed everything. Not because of what he found, but because of what he didn't find. Stay with me. Over the following 6 weeks, the feeling grew. Not because of dramatic evidence. Because of absences. Small, almost imperceptible gaps in the texture of our daily life. Diane had always been physically affectionate, unconsciously so, the way some people are. A hand on my shoulder passing through the kitchen. Her foot against mine under the dinner table. Small, constant, unthinking contact that had characterized our entire relationship. It began to decrease. Slightly. Gradually. In a way that would have been invisible to anyone not paying the specific kind of attention I had begun paying. She started going to the gym. 3 times a week initially, then 4. I was glad for her, she had talked about wanting to get back into a routine. But the gym she chose was 40 minutes away, when there were 2 perfectly good facilities within 10 minutes of our house. When I mentioned it casually, she said the classes at the farther gym were better. The instructor was exceptional. She had tried it on a friend's recommendation and loved it. I said that was great. I looked up the gym online that night. It offered no classes on the 2 Tuesday evenings she had come home flushed and quietly electric in that particular way I was beginning to recognize and dread. That was the moment I stopped telling myself I was being paranoid. That was the moment I understood that what I was feeling was not insecurity. It was information. I did not confront her. I know that surprises people when I tell them. The instinct, the overwhelming, almost physical instinct, is to demand answers immediately. To put the evidence on the table and watch the reaction and know. But I had spent 9 years in courtrooms watching people destroy their own cases by moving too fast. By acting on emotion before the evidence was complete. by giving the other side time to prepare a defense before the full picture had been assembled. I was not going to make that mistake in my own home. Instead, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a colleague who had navigated a difficult divorce 2 years earlier. I asked him, quietly and without full explanation, for the name of the investigator he had used. He gave it without pressing me for details. Goodman. The second was to my attorney. Not to initiate anything. Simply to understand, in the abstract, what my legal position would look like in various scenarios. The third was to the investigator himself. A former detective named Reeves who had the demeanor of a man who had heard every version of every story and retained the ability to be neither shocked nor judgmental by any of them. I told him what I needed. He told me what it would cost and how long it would take. I hired him the same afternoon. While Reeves worked quietly in the background, Marcus did something psychologically extraordinary. He maintained his entire life exactly as normal. Date nights. Morning coffee. Conversations about the future. He told me later, every evening I sat across from her at dinner and performed the role of a man who had no idea. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. And the most necessary. Here is what Reeves found in week 1. Reeves delivered his first update after 9 days. His name was Connor Hale. 38 years old. A personal trainer, not at the gym Diane attended, but at the one closest to our house. The one she had specifically chosen not to join. They had been meeting at a hotel 20 minutes outside the city. Not every week, but regularly enough that Reeves had documented 4 separate occasions within his first 9 days of observation alone. I read Reeves' report in my car. Parked in my own driveway. While inside the house, through the kitchen window, I could see Diane moving around preparing dinner, her back to me, completely unaware. I sat in that car for 22 minutes. Then I went inside, washed my hands, and asked her how her day had been. I need you to understand what that required. To read documentation of your wife's betrayal and then walk into your kitchen and ask about her day. To pass her the salt at dinner and refill her wine glass and laugh at something she said. People ask me how I did it. The honest answer is, I did it because I was not finished yet. Because Reeves had given me the outline of the truth but not its full dimensions. And I needed everything before I moved. I asked Reeves for 2 more weeks. What he uncovered in those 2 weeks went beyond anything I had steeled myself to discover. Connor Hale was not simply a man my wife had fallen into a reckless affair with. He was someone she had been deliberately, actively integrating into a parallel version of her life for nearly 8 months. Reeves found social media accounts, private ones, created under a slightly altered version of her name, where she had documented what appeared to be, from her perspective, a genuine relationship. Photographs. Captions written with a tenderness that I recognized because she had once directed it entirely at me. Our last anniversary had fallen inside those 8 months. The weekend away I had planned for 3 months, the hotel on the coast, the dinner reservation I had made in February for an October evening. She had cried that weekend, happy tears, she said, because she was so grateful, because I knew her so well, because she loved our life. 8 months. What Marcus found next in Reeves' final report was the detail that transformed this from a story about betrayal into something else entirely. Something that would determine not just the end of his marriage, but the beginning of a legal process that Connor Hale had absolutely not anticipated. Pay attention to this part. In his final report, Reeves included something I had not requested but which he had flagged as potentially relevant. Connor Hale had a history. 2 previous relationships, one a marriage, one a long-term partnership, that had ended under circumstances strikingly similar to the current situation. In both cases, the woman involved had been married or seriously committed. In both cases, the relationship had ended abruptly when the pattern became legally complicated. More critically, Connor Hale had an outstanding civil matter from 18 months ago. A former client of his personal training business had filed a complaint involving financial irregularities, training packages paid for and never delivered, contracts signed under misleading terms. It had never been fully resolved. I forwarded that information to my attorney with a single line of instruction. Find out everything. On a Sunday morning, 6 weeks after I had watched her drive away from our upstairs window, I asked Diane to sit down. I had set 3 things on the coffee table. Reeves' complete reports, bound and tabbed. A legal document my attorney had prepared. And a single printed photograph, not one I had taken, not one Reeves had taken, but one she had posted herself, on the private account she believed no one who knew her would ever find. She saw the photograph first. The blood left her face in a single, visible moment. She looked up at me and I saw something I had never seen on her face in 6 years, genuine fear. Not of me. Not of what I might do. Fear of the completeness of what was laid out in front of her. Fear of a person who had not reacted with emotion but with precision. She opened her mouth. I held up one hand. I told her I did not need her to explain. I told her I did not need her to apologize. I told her that every question I had once needed answered had been answered without her assistance and that the only conversation remaining between us was the one my attorney would be having with hers. She started crying. I stood up, picked up my car keys, and took Scout for a walk. The divorce took 9 months. Marcus's attorney was thorough and the documentation Reeves had assembled was comprehensive. Connor Hale's legal complications resurfaced during the process in ways that created consequences he had not foreseen. And Diane, who had believed she was building a future with someone, discovered that the person she had chosen was considerably less than she had imagined. But here is the part of this story that Marcus says matters most. Not the legal outcome. Not the settlement. What happened to him on the other side of all of it? The divorce was finalized on a Thursday morning. I signed the last document in Patricia's office, shook her hand, and walked out into a November morning that was cold and bright and completely ordinary. I sat in my car. And for the first time in 9 months, possibly for the first time in much longer than that, I felt something I had almost forgotten was available to me. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. Healing is not that simple, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. There were months that were genuinely dark. Months where the absence of the life I had believed I was living felt like a physical weight I carried from room to room. But underneath the grief, underneath the anger that came and went in waves, there was something solid. Something that had not been there before, or perhaps had always been there but had been obscured by the effort of maintaining a life built on someone else's dishonesty. Integrity. My own. Uncompromised. Intact. I had not screamed. I had not threatened. I had not acted from the worst version of myself in the worst moments of my life. I had gathered the truth with patience and care, and I had used it cleanly and completely. She had built her secret with 8 months of careful work. I had dismantled it in 6 weeks. People ask me what the lesson is. They want a clean takeaway, a single line that justifies the pain and wraps the story into something instructive. Here is the closest I can get. The moment she drove away from that upstairs window, the moment I watched her leave and picked up that phone, I had already made the most important decision of the entire story. Not the decision to investigate. Not the decision to divorce. The decision to stop lying to myself. Because here is what I understand now that I did not fully understand then: she had been lying to me for 8 months. But in a quieter, more forgivable way, I had been lying to myself for longer. Telling myself the feeling was paranoia. Telling myself the absences meant nothing. Telling myself that trust required me to ignore what my own instincts were clearly and consistently telling me. The day I stopped doing that was the day I got my life back. Not the day the divorce was finalized. Not the day Reeves delivered his report. Not the day I laid the evidence on the coffee table. The day I trusted myself enough to pick up the phone. Scout still sleeps at the foot of my bed. The mortgage is mine now, fully, cleanly mine. And on Saturday mornings, I make my own coffee, sit in the quiet of a house that contains no lies, and think about how different the weight of a life feels when everything in it is real. She thought she was driving towards something better. She was driving away from the only men who ever truly knew her. And I, finally, completely, without apology, am at peace with that. If this story held you until the very last word, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that walking away with your dignity is always the most powerful move available to you. Like. Subscribe. And stay close, because the next story begins where you least expect it.